You pick up your cell phone, type, delete it, type it again. It's just a simple message. A "do you have a minute?" A "can I call you back?" A silly request for help or attention. But your hands shake, your fingers hesitate, and your mind, that mind that never shuts up, whispers, "It's no bother, it's no, never mind." You erase everything. Again, from the outside, no one notices. You look calm, helpful, too quiet. But inside, there's a storm of doubt, shame, and fear. You live as if your every gesture were a burden to others. Every word an exaggeration. Every presence an excess. You apologize for speaking, for asking, for needing. You apologize for existing. And the most devastating thing is that no one sees this pain, because it's subtle, invisible, silent. It's that moment when you're in a group of friends and you think twice before sharing something. Is it interesting enough? Am I not stealing attention? And usually you decide not to speak. That's when you feel bad, but say, it's okay, because you've learned that feeling too much is uncomfortable, that showing weakness is a burden, that people prefer you to be functional, lively, and light. And little by little you've learned to perform this lightness, even though you carry an absurd weight inside your chest. You've learned to be light so as not to weigh you down. And now, even when you need help, you prefer silence. Even when you're falling apart inside, you smile. And when someone finally asks if everything is all right, you shrink even more. As if even the other person's worry was your fault. This pain, this feeling of being a constant nuisance, has no easy name. It's not something you can explain with a motivational phrase or a ready-made answer. It seeps into everyday life, between the lines, in the seconds of hesitation before acting. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is for you to simply exist without apologizing? How difficult it is to take up space without feeling like you're taking someone else's place? How difficult it is to ask without feeling like you're demanding too much? This is the pain that doesn't scream, but it never sleeps. It's the pain of feeling that your very presence is a burden. And maybe you've never said that out loud. Perhaps you've never had the courage to name this emptiness. Because it's shameful, because it makes you feel weak, small, broken. But here's the brutal truth. This pain is not your fault. It was planted, cultivated, reinforced, little by little, by looks, absences, silences, subtle rejections. And today it has become a filter. Everything you do goes through it. All your actions are measured not by desire, but by fear. Fear of getting in the way. Fear of being too much. Fear of being discarded. But what if I told you that this pain had an origin? That this suffocating feeling of inadequacy has a deeper explanation? What if you're not a burden, but someone who carries the weight of the world on your back because you've never learned to allow yourself to be? Today we're going to look at this through different eyes. Let's look at it through the eyes of Carl Jung. We're going to discover that this feeling of being a nuisance may actually be a reflection of something much deeper, the repression of your essence in the name of an acceptance that never came. It's not weakness, it's a calling. And this video is the first step towards answering that call. Are you ready to really listen to yourself? Then come with me. You feel like a burden. Yes, that's what it is. It's not exaggeration. It's not drama. It's what, deep down, accompanies you in almost every interaction, in almost every gesture of daily life. It's a feeling stuck in your chest, hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. It's like walking around with an invisible sign attached to your body that reads, "Sorry for existing." You may not say it out loud. You can even laugh, make fun of yourself, seem lighthearted. But every time you apologize for being the slightest bit late, for taking up space on the sidewalk, for interrupting someone even though you didn't mean to, it's this pain that manifests itself. And it's not uncommon. It manifests itself in small attitudes. The way you walk into a room trying not to attract attention. In the way you place yourself. In conversations, always measuring, always stepping on toes. In the fact that you're the first to apologize, even when you haven't done anything wrong. Feeling guilty for needing it. feeling inadequate for simply being there. You're afraid of being a nuisance, of being too much, of being too little, of being noticed, of being ignored. It's a constant paradox. You want connection, but you fear being seen, because somewhere inside you there's an ingrained belief, I'm a nuisance. You learned this, not all at once, but little by little, in environments where there was no room for your pain, where feeling was wrong, asking was too much, crying was weakness, where your affection was conditional, where you grew up understanding that in order to be accepted, you had to be useful, you had to be silent, you had to please, and that became an identity. You began to present yourself to the world with filters, hiding the part of you that feels, that needs, that makes mistakes, that wants to be held. Instead, you offered the best of yourself, the most pleasant, the most functional, the lightest. And the more you annulled yourself, the more you were praised for it. But behind this silent applause, pain grew. Carl Jung, the thinker who guides us in this video, knew how to name this pain. For him, what you are experiencing is not shyness, it's not insecurity, it's a repression of the soul. It's the exclusion of essential parts of who you are, all to fit into an ideal that isn't yours. You weren't born thinking you were a burden. You were taught that. And perhaps the most perverse thing about this pain is this: you feel guilty, even though you haven't done anything wrong. Jung explained that when the psyche is constantly exposed to rejection, explicit or implicit, it learns to protect itself by repressing what caused the pain. And when being who you are brings estrangement, your mind learns to hide that version, to repress your voice, your spontaneity, your truth. But the body doesn't forget. The soul doesn't forget. That's why you feel exhausted even though you haven't done so much. That's why any praise seems false. That's why you cringe at the slightest hint of criticism. Because you're always trying not to bother, as if your mere existence required justification. You live in a state of chronic apology. But today, here, you're hearing something different. Something that perhaps no one has ever told you so clearly. You are not a burden. You never were. You've learned to carry the weight of others, the guilt of others, the responsibility for keeping everything in balance. But that was never fair. It was never love. It was never truth. Carl Jung said that the soul screams when it is not heard, and that feeling of being a burden is your soul begging to be seen. Not as the person who doesn't do any work, not as the person who helps everyone, but as someone real, complete, imperfect, worthy. This video is a mirror, and perhaps you are seeing for the first time the source of your pain, so I invite you to look without looking away. Pain has a name, it has a root, it has an explanation, and more than that, it has a way out. But it all starts here. When you stop apologizing for being you. What if this pain isn't your fault? You've heard it before, perhaps in a generic way, perhaps as a gesture of consolation. But I'm not talking about guilt as someone trying to alleviate their responsibility. I'm talking about the root of origin, of a deeper truth that perhaps no one has shown you. What if this feeling of being a nuisance wasn't born in you, but was taught to you? Think carefully. Have you ever wondered why you feel the way you do? Why, even when you're kind, present, and helpful, do you constantly feel that you're too much? Why, even when you're loved, do you doubt it? Why, even surrounded by people, is there still this voice inside you? A voice whispering that you get in the way, that you weigh you down, that you're excessive? What if that voice isn't yours? What if it's an echo, an emotional inheritance, a reflection of all the times you've molded yourself to be accepted, of all the parts of you that you've learned to hide? Carl Jung warns us, much of what we feel as our conflicts is not really ours. It's the result of an invisible structure, built up little by the demands of the world around us. You learned early on what pleased, what was praised, what was acceptable, and what wasn't. You were silenced. Your intensity, your fragility, your deep sensitivity. All this was put in silence, in shadows, Because someone one day frowned. Someone said, "Not like that." Someone turned their face away. Someone walked away. And you, like every human being who longs to belong, got the message. It's better to hide. Better to smile, even when it hurt. Better to help even when you were powerless. Better to keep quiet even if you wanted to shout. Better to be light, pleasant, and easy to love. But the soul doesn't go out with impunity. What you hide doesn't disappear. It just waits. Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you ignore grows stronger in the darkness." And that's why, even though you've done everything right, you still carry this pain. Because you don't live as who you are. You live as who you've learned to be. But what if that could change? What if the feeling of being a burden isn't a defect, but a symptom? An alarm from the soul telling you, "Hey, I'm still here, and I'm suffocating." What if the guilt you feel for asking, for existing, for feeling, is just a reflection of the repression you've been taught to practice? What if you're not fragile, but repressed? That's the turning point. The door ajar. You're not too much. You're not a problem. You're not a burden. You are someone who has learned to hide your light so as not to dazzle, who has learned to shrink in order to fit in. You've spent too much time trying not to be rejected, and ended up rejecting yourself. But now, the time has come to look with Jung's eyes. With eyes that see the invisible. With the courage of someone who wants to see the whole of themselves, and not just the socially acceptable half. Today in this video, we're going on a journey inwards, because the answer lies within you. Not in the voices that accuse you, not in the looks that have judged you, not in the absences that hurt. Inside, in the shadows, in the forgotten part. The part that no matter how hard you try to hide it, still pulses. And that part deserves to be seen. Carl Jung will be our lens, our mirror. Because, as he said, you don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. Let's make that pain conscious, and perhaps discover that it was never yours to carry. Are you ready to step into that mirror? Carl Jung used to say, "Everything we don't face within ourselves ends up manifesting itself as destiny." And what does this mean when we talk about the feeling of being a burden? It means that what you feel today, that silent guilt for simply existing, that automatic withdrawal, that constant fear of being a nuisance, may not just be a trait of your personality. It could be a deep reflection of something you've repressed for so long, that now seems inevitable, natural, part of who you are. But it's not. According to Jung, this is the direct consequence of not having faced, or even acknowledged, what is in us. What we feel, what we want, what hurts, what pulses. When these parts don't find space to live, they don't disappear. They come back, in distorted, unconscious, painful ways. They come back as destiny, as patterns, as pains that repeat themselves until we can finally look them in the face. And that's how it started, isn't it? You were a child. You didn't really know what being too much was, but you felt it. You felt a lot. You cried when you felt lonely. You screamed when you wanted attention. You laughed out loud. You questioned. You wanted a lap. You wanted space. You wanted to be. And one day someone looked at you disapprovingly. They said, "What an exaggeration." They said, "Be quiet." They said, "You don't need that now." And at that moment, something that was natural in you, your feeling, your intensity, your presence, was labeled as excess. The child in you understood. I'm too much. I need to contain myself. And you began to shut up. You silenced your pain, your desire, your anger, your desire to be seen. You learned that being accepted meant being light, easy, contained. And you learned to adapt, to mold yourself, to do what was expected of you. But in doing so, you also began to disappear. Jung called this disappearance the formation of the shadow. The shadow is everything that, out of fear, shame, or pain, you push out of your consciousness. Everything that you believe you are not allowed to show, but which, even hidden, continues to influence you. The shadow is born when we silence what made us human. It forms with every repressed emotion, with every ignored need, with every part of you that wasn't welcome and was therefore exiled. And the cruelest thing, the shadow doesn't just contain your pain, it contains your strength, your spontaneity, your truth. The child who once cried, out loud, was also the living, whole, pulsating child. The child who didn't know how to pretend. But you had to learn to pretend. You had to learn to contain even what was beautiful about you. And today, it comes back. Not as a scream, but as a continuous whisper. I'm sorry I'm here. Am I in the way? I'll keep quiet so as not to weigh you down. This is the price of a life lived under the logic of adaptation. You've become functional, but you've lost touch with your own essence. Jung didn't see this as a weakness, but as a collective wound. A wound that almost all of us carry. That of having been educated to please, to contain ourselves, to obey, instead of being welcomed in our complexity. But there is a way out, and it starts with a fresh look. With the courage to recognize that you are not less for feeling what you feel, that this pain is not a sign of failure, but of repression. From the moment you start to look at your shadow honestly, something changes. You stop being a prisoner of what you've been taught to hide, and you start to integrate, to become whole. Jung said, "I would rather be whole than good," and that's the key. You don't just have to be light, nice, pleasant. You can be whole. You can feel. You can position yourself. You can take up space. You can make mistakes. You can ask. You can live. The feeling of being a burden is not your essence. It's an echo from your childhood, a reflection of all the times you were told you were too much, that you were inconvenient, that you had to shut up to be loved. But now you know, that's not true. Carl Jung is here like a beacon, like a mirror, and he invites you to do the hardest and most necessary of jobs, to make conscious everything that has been thrown into the darkness, because only when you face your shadow can you finally stop living as a burden and start living as you really are. The shadow, as Carl Jung explained, is not a dark place where your faults, vices, or flaws live. No. The shadow is, in fact, a sacred and silent depository of everything you've had to hide in order to be accepted. It is your authentic self, locked away inside. Imagine that from an early age, every time you felt something strongly, fear, sadness, anger, too much enthusiasm, too much sensitivity, and someone reacted with disapproval, you took that piece of yourself and put it in an invisible suitcase. And so, without realizing it, you began to carry this weight. A weight that increased every time you were called exaggerated, difficult, too sensitive. You learned that feeling is dangerous, that showing pain is ugly, that talking too much is neediness, that to need is to be weak, and so you created a character. The character that pleases, who speaks softly, who doesn't demand anything, who is always available, always understanding. This character was praised, accepted, valued, and you began to believe that you would only be loved if you were like that. But inside, the suitcase kept filling up, with your no's that were never said, with your aborted wishes, with his legitimate anger that was silenced, with her need for a lap, a hug, a sense of belonging. Everything was kept in the shadows, and the shadow doesn't forget. It shows itself, always, because what you don't express, the body feels. The heart carries it. The mind repeats it. In everyday life, this emotional repression appears in almost invisible ways. You hesitate before asking for help, even when you're on the edge. You blame yourself for resting. You feel ashamed to cry, even when you're in pain. You compare yourself with others and silently conclude that there is something wrong with you, that you are weak, that you are insufficient, that you're never at the right point. But the truth is different. You are not the weight. You're just carrying the silence of everything you never had room to be. That suitcase you're dragging around, it's made up of all the versions of you that had to be silenced in order for you to survive emotionally. It carries your muffled cries, your restrained intensity, your unrequited love, your inner child that wasn't welcomed, and that weighs you down. You feel the weight in your body, like chronic tiredness, tension in your shoulders, insomnia. You feel it in your mind as constant self-criticism, as that voice that never leaves you alone. You feel it in your relationships, where you withdraw, hide, diminish yourself, all so as not to repeat the abandonment of before. But there's something nobody told you. The shadow isn't the end of you. It's your chance to start over, because everything that is there is still you. Everything that was exiled, forgotten, repressed, still pulses, still wants to live. And that's Jung's proposal, to integrate, not to erase the shadow, but to bring it to light, not to fight it, but to listen to it, because it holds your purest truth, still intact. The shadow is the part of you that says enough is enough when you accept the unacceptable. It's the part that revolts when you keep quiet. It's the one that cries when you pretend. It is your authenticity radar. She's your reminder that something is wrong, even when everyone else says everything is fine. And when you ignore her, she screams. It screams in the form of anxiety, existential crises, a chronic feeling of inadequacy. Because until you come to terms with who you are, you'll always be trying to be who they expect you to be. But this is curable. The cure begins when you stop. Stop pretending you don't feel it. Stop apologizing for existing. Stop adapting your soul to fit the molds of those who didn't know how to accept you. Little by little, you can open that suitcase, review what you've kept, reintegrate its parts. Perhaps you'll find an anger in there that scares you, but which is actually your strength. Perhaps you'll find a pain that you thought you'd already overcome, but which was just waiting to be heard. Perhaps you'll find a sensitivity that you tried to kill, but which is your greatest bridge to the world. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to free you. You are not the nuisance. You're not the problem. You are not the exaggeration. You are the life that has been squeezed out of the way, and now that life wants to breathe. Pause. Breathe. Just for a moment. Breathe slowly. Now, look inside. You feel like a burden. You walk around the world apologizing for existing. You apologize with your eyes, with your body, with the absence of words, as if you were always taking up too much time, demanding too much, being too much, even in silence. But what if it's not true? What if the problem isn't with you? What if this weight you carry on your shoulders, this guilt you feel even when you need something simple, company, attention, rest, isn't yours? What if what you call being a nuisance is actually the consequence of never having learned to see yourself as someone worthy of existing fully? This question hurts, I know, because it points directly to a place you avoid. A dark place where an old feeling of inadequacy lives, where phrases echo that no one had to say out loud, but that you learned anyway. Don't make a fuss. Don't cry so much. Don't bother. And you obeyed, not because you wanted to, but because you understood that if you didn't adapt, you'd lose love, attention, belonging. From an early age, you were faced with an impossible choice: be who you are and risk rejection, or hide everything you feel, everything you want, everything you need in order to continue to have a place. And you chose survival. You chose silence. But over the years, that silence has become an identity. It became a habit. It became a prison. Now, you look in the mirror and you no longer know if that you is really yours, or if it's just a reflection shaped by all the expectations you've worked hard to meet. You've become the master of not bothering, at saying it's fine when it's not, anticipating what the other person wants before they even say it, hiding your sadness under a polite smile, silencing your anger with artificial kindness, and all this for what? To maintain the idea that you're easy to love, that you're always fine, that you're no trouble. But at what cost? Have you ever stopped to think about what you've been missing out on while trying not to bother? How many wishes have you swallowed? How many cries have you stifled? How many requests for help have you turned into silence? How many dreams have you put aside for fear of appearing selfish? How many times have you felt a lump in your throat and yet said, "Sure, no problem"? And all this because deep down, something in you believes that you're not enough, that you're not worthy, that you don't have the right to be whole. But what if all this is wrong? What if no one ever taught you that you have the right to exist, with your flaws, your desires, your needs? What if what you feel today isn't a confirmation that you're a burden, but a symptom of the repression you've suffered? Jung said that what we don't face in ourselves manifests itself as destiny, and perhaps your destiny of feeling invisible, of thinking you weigh too much, of canceling yourself out in relationships, isn't destiny. It's just the unconscious repetition of an old pattern that you never had the chance to question. But now you do. You can do something different. You can start with a simple and brutal question. What if there's nothing wrong with you? What if you were taught that you only deserved love when you were small, discreet, and silent? What if your pain isn't a sign of weakness, but of everything that hasn't yet been said, felt, or experienced? You weren't born to bend over, to walk around apologizing, to diminish yourself. You were born to take up space, to feel, to say, to exist with truth. But that only begins when you dare to look at the question you've avoided for so long. What if the problem isn't that I'm too much, but that the world has never taught me to love myself fully? The answer doesn't come now, nor will it come tomorrow. But the question has already planted the seed, and that seed will break through the soil one day, because that's how liberation begins. In the discomfort of those who, for the first time, choose to see themselves with their own eyes. You are not a burden. You're just someone who has been trained not to have needs. This is the truth that you may never have heard clearly, but that your soul has been trying to shout for years. That feeling of being a burden, of taking up too much space, of asking for attention as if you were committing a crime. It wasn't born with you. It was planted, reinforced, cultivated in silence. And now it seems part of your identity, but it's not. This feeling is a symptom, an alarm, a reflection of something much deeper. Your disconnection with the self, with your truest, most complete, freest self. At some point in your history, you learned to shrink, to reduce your brightness, your tone of voice, your desires. You learned that to feel too much was to be weak, that to ask for too much was to be selfish, that to really show yourself was to run the risk of being rejected. So you adapted, and with each adaptation, you lost a piece of yourself. You became the expert on being functional, in being okay, never demanding too much. And that's how people saw you: independent, balanced, strong. No one can imagine the effort it takes. No one sees the lump in your throat, the emotional fatigue, the loneliness that seeps into the corners of your soul. But now you begin to understand. You're not strong because you've learned to shut up. You're strong because you've survived in silence. But true strength lies in feeling again. It's in listening to yourself, in choosing yourself. Your body knows this. Notice the tension in your shoulders, the tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep, the tightness in your chest that appears without warning. These are all manifestations of your soul asking for space. Yes, space. Because even though you've learned to shrink, your body no longer accepts this movement. It pulses, it hurts, it demands. Because inside you there is still life, and life wants to live fully. You're not a nuisance. You never were. You've just never been allowed to be whole. You've never been taught to recognize and embrace your own needs. You learned to measure everything by others, to read yourself through other people's eyes, to value yourself only when you were useful, pleasant, easy to deal with. But that's not love. That's conditioning. And it's okay to recognize that now, because it's not too late. You can start to reverse this movement. You can sit down with yourself and say, I exist, I feel, I need, I am. And that's not weakness. That's your truth trying to be reborn. Jung said that the process of individuation, the path to becoming who you really are, begins when you stop trying to please the world and start listening to your soul. This is your moment, the moment to stop living as an echo of what others want, and start living as the voice that has always been there, even if it's muffled. You don't need to change into someone else. You just need to stop running away from who you've always been, and there's no greater revelation than that. You were never a burden. You just haven't learned that you have the right to exist, just the way you are. The pain you feel is not proof of your inadequacy. It's a sign that there are parts of you asking to come back. Starting today, you can begin to make room for them. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be a simple gesture, a small decision, a deeper breath, a request you've never had the courage to make, a limit you've always been afraid to set. That's the beginning. It's the soul expanding after being compressed for so long. You've learned to shrink, but your soul can't take it anymore. It wants to live, and you can let it. Today, do something different. Today, write a letter. Not to anyone who has hurt you, not to anyone you still hope will understand you. This letter is for you. More precisely to your childhood self. That little you. With eyes too big, emotions too intense, questions too insistent. That you who ran around with an open heart, not knowing that one day you would be afraid to feel. That one day you would learn to hide. Take a piece of paper, a pen. It doesn't matter the place, the time. It just needs to be true. Start like this. Hey, little one, I'm back. Write to him like someone who comes back for something precious that was left behind. Because it is. Your courage to ask without fear remained. Your desire to cry out loud, to laugh without explaining yourself, to throw yourself into the world with an open chest. Talk to him like someone offering shelter. Tell him what he never heard, but always deserved to hear. Say it, you're not too much, you're not a burden, you can exist. Whole. Tell him that now you understand, that no one took you in as you deserved, that they made you believe that feeling was too much, that wishing was ugly, that crying was weakness, that loving was dangerous. Explain that he began to hide all this not because it was wrong, but because he needed to survive. Because he was too young to understand that it was never his mistake. It was the world that didn't know how to love. Tell him that now you're here, that now you know, and that from now on he no longer has to hide. You can write in anger, with sadness, with pain. You can write crying. The important thing is to write truthfully. This letter is a ritual. It's symbolic, but real. Because it is in this simple gesture that something in you begins to change. Because by giving voice to your repressed self, you begin to bring it home. You begin to say to yourself, I see you, and being seen is the first step towards healing. Many of us go our whole lives waiting for someone to validate us, for someone to finally say, you're good enough, you are loved, you can be who you are. But Jung reminds us, no one can do that job for you. You are the only one who can tell yourself what you needed to hear back there. And this letter is the beginning of that. Don't worry about writing it right. Don't proofread, don't censor. Just write like you're taking a load off, like someone breathing, again after a long time. And when you've finished, read it out loud. Read it to yourself. Read it to your body. Read it to the child that still lives inside. You'll notice something strange, perhaps even uncomfortable, because when you hear your own voice saying these words, something begins to break down. A wall, an armor, a lie you've repeated for years. The lie that feeling was too much, that you were too much. This letter is a break. It marks the moment when you decide to accept yourself. It's not the solution to everything, but it is the first step. After it, other words will come. Other choices, other decisions. Little by little, you begin to live more fully, to ask with less guilt, to feel with less shame, to exist with more truth. And whenever you forget, write again. Write another letter to the boy who kept quiet, to the girl who shrank away, to the child who just wanted to be loved, and say it all again. You can exist, whole, without excuses. No disguises, no fear. The letter is in your hands, and maybe for the first time you're starting to really write yourself. Jung used to say, "What we deny in ourselves enslaves us." And perhaps now that phrase makes more sense than ever. You've spent a lifetime trying not to be a burden, avoiding feeling too much, asking too much, wanting too much. You did everything you could to be light, discreet, acceptable, and little by little, without realizing it, you imprisoned whole parts of yourself. You denied your anger in order to appear understanding. You denied your pain so as not to worry anyone. You denied your desire to be seen in order to remain easy to deal with. But each denial became an invisible handcuff, an extra link in the chain that binds you to the fear of bothering, to the guilt of existing, to the silence that suffocates. Little by little, you became a slave to your own repression, not because you wanted to, but because it was what you knew how to do to survive. Only now, you're waking up. You're beginning to realize that this feeling of being a burden doesn't come from who you are. It comes from what you had to hide in order to keep being loved. You're not too much. You're not a problem. You're not a mistake. You are whole. You always have been. But you've been trained to live as half, and living as half hurts. It corrodes. It weakens you. No matter how hard you try to adapt, how strong you try to be, how much you try to smile, the pain of not being able to be yourself fully always comes back. And it comes back because you weren't born to fit. You were born to expand. Now is the time. Time to release the words that got stuck. Time to embrace what they've always tried to make you deny. Time to listen to what your soul has been whispering for so long. I exist, and I have value, even when I don't please, even when I'm imperfect, even when I need it. You are rediscovering the courage to see yourself, to write, to belong, and on this journey, you are not alone. Here, in this space, there are many like you. People who feel out of place, guilty for feeling, carrying weights that aren't theirs. People who are also trying to learn to love their own voices, their own shadows, their own emotional bodies. This channel is not about ready-made answers. It's about mirrors, about listening, about reunion. That's why today, I want to invite you to be part of this space of shared truth. Please answer in the comments. What part of you is afraid of being a nuisance? Is it your sadness, your intense way of feeling, your desire for more attention, your weariness of bearing others' burdens, your impulse to say enough? Write it down. Not to please, not to justify yourself. Write like someone letting go of a chain, like someone who, for the first time, decides to put their soul on paper. Jung also said, "Those who look out dream, those who look inwards awaken, and you are awakening. Welcome to your truth."